I still remember the way the morning light fell across my kitchen table that day, soft, gold, and undeserving of what was about to happen. The smell of toast lingered in the air and the clock ticked slow enough to make me think the world was at peace. Then Tanya's car door slammed outside, sharp and impatient. My heart sank before she even knocked. She never knocked softly. She pushed the door open with one hand, balancing a toddler on her hip and dragging a suitcase behind her. "Can you watch them for the week?" she said, her tone flat like I was an employee who couldn't say no. Before I could answer, she dropped the diaper bag on the floor with a thud. "You do nothing anyway, just watch them while I'm gone." Her words sliced through me before I even had time to breathe. I stared at her, my daughter-in-law, the woman my son had chosen, the mother of my grandchildren, and I felt something shift quietly inside me. It wasn't anger yet, not exactly. It was disbelief mixed with a kind of hollow sadness that has no name. I looked down at little Lily tugging on my sleeve, her eyes big and trusting. Beside her, Daniel was already wandering toward the living room with his toy truck, completely unaware that his mother's words had just bruised the woman who'd once rocked his father to sleep. "Tanya," I said softly, "you didn't even ask if I was free." She sighed, flipping her hair as if my voice was background noise. "You're always free, Margaret. What do you even do all day? It's not like you have a job or anywhere to be." I wanted to tell her that I had worked for 40 years, that I had buried a husband, raised a son alone, and spent my life making sure other people could stand where they are now. But I didn't. I simply nodded because pride doesn't cook breakfast for children, and I refused to let the little ones feel the chill of what had just passed between their mother and me. When she finally turned to leave, she glanced back and said, "Oh, and please don't feed them too much sugar this time. Last time they were bouncing off the walls." The front door closed, her car engine faded down the street. Silence filled the house like fog. For a long while, I just stood there, staring at the dent her suitcase had left on the rug. I could hear the children laughing in the next room, their giggles echoing through a house that had once been full of my own son's laughter. I wanted to feel joy in that sound, but all I felt was the echo of her words circling in my mind. "You do nothing anyway." It was strange how one sentence could strip decades of worth from a person. I had never thought of myself as useless, but that morning I felt invisible in my own home. As I poured myself a cup of coffee, my hands trembled, not from anger but from something deeper, realization. I had given so much, and somehow, somewhere, I had become background to the lives I'd built. I sat down at that same kitchen table, the toast now cold, and whispered to no one in particular, "Maybe it's time I stop saying yes." The clock kept ticking, steady and cruel. The laughter of my grandchildren carried through the walls, warm and innocent, reminding me why I couldn't just walk away. But deep inside, beneath the quiet patience that had carried me all these years, something new began to stir, a still, steady decision waiting for its moment. If only I'd known how much those careless words would change everything. For most of my life, mornings had been my favorite time of day. Before the phone calls, before the errands, before anyone needed anything. Just the hush of dawn, a cup of tea in my favorite chipped mug, and the sound of the sparrows outside my kitchen window. It was my little ritual, one that had followed me through decades of change. I suppose when you spend years caring for others, quiet becomes its own kind of companion. My garden had always been my sanctuary. Rows of marigolds, a stubborn patch of lavender that refused to grow straight, and a tiny wooden bench I'd painted sky blue after my husband died. I used to sit there and read the same books over and over, old novels where people wrote letters and meant every word. Sometimes I'd imagine what my husband Paul would say if he saw me now. He'd probably tell me to stop worrying about everyone else and start living for myself. But old habits die hard. When Paul passed, our son Michael was only 12. I remember holding his hand at the funeral, wondering how a child could look so calm while I felt like my whole world was burning. I made him a promise that day that I'd give him every chance in life, no matter how much it took out of me. And I did. I worked 2 jobs, taught extra classes, skipped vacations, and stayed up nights grading papers while he slept. Every milestone of his college, first car, wedding felt like proof that my sacrifices had been worth it. But life has a cruel way of twisting the very things you build with love. When Michael met Tanya, I wanted to be happy for him. She was beautiful, confident, the kind of woman who filled every room she entered. I'll admit she intimidated me a little. She had opinions about everything, how her coffee should be made, how children should be raised, even how my house could use a little modern touch. I told myself she was young, just trying to find her place. After the wedding, things shifted slowly. At first, it was subtle, her calling me Margaret instead of Mom, her quick sigh when I offered help, her way of turning gratitude into something transactional. Michael adored her, though. He'd defend her tone by saying she was just tired from work or that I was reading too much into things, so I learned to stay quiet. I didn't want to be the difficult mother-in-law. They lived across town, but I saw them often. Tanya was always rushing somewhere: meetings, fitness classes, friends, dinners. I admired her energy, but I also worried that she was missing the sweetness of small things. When she'd drop off the children, her phone was always in her hand. She'd kiss them on the forehead, half distracted, and say, "Grandma's house is fun, isn't it?" before running out the door. I wanted to believe she meant well, but her visits always left a trace of cold air behind. Michael, bless him, tried to bridge the gap. He'd call once a week, sometimes twice if work wasn't too heavy. "Mom, you know how she is," he'd say. "She just gets overwhelmed. She appreciates you more than she says." I'd nod, pretending I believed him. It was easier that way. Easier to hold on to the illusion that family love always finds its balance. My house, once full of noise and conversation, had grown quiet. I filled the silence with books, crosswords, and gardening. On Sundays, I'd bake a small loaf of bread, even when there was no one to share it with. I suppose I hoped the smell would make the walls remember what laughter sounded like. Sometimes in the evenings, I'd sit by the window watching cars pass. I'd imagine one of them slowing down, Michael stepping out, holding flowers, saying he just wanted to visit. But those moments never came. Still, I held no bitterness. Not yet. I told myself this was simply how modern families worked: busy, distant, running on borrowed time. I was content being useful, being needed, even in small ways. I didn't realize then that being needed and being valued aren't the same thing. I thought love was about how much you give. I hadn't yet learned that sometimes it's about how much you stop giving. And that lesson was waiting for me, just beyond one more knock on my door. There was a time when everything between us felt easy, like a spring morning before the clouds roll in. When Michael first told me he was getting married, I remember the way his eyes lit up. He said Tanya made him feel alive again, that she challenged him, made him laugh, made him dream bigger. I could hear Paul's voice in my head, proud and teasing: "Our boy, in love, Maggie." And I wanted nothing more than for that love to last. Those months before the wedding were some of the busiest and happiest of my life. I threw myself into helping, not because anyone asked, but because that's what mothers do. I spent hours picking fabrics, comparing invitations, baking cakes to test flavors. Tanya seemed appreciative at first. She even hugged me once and said, "You're a lifesaver, Margaret." That little word, lifesaver, meant more to me than I let on. I wrote it in my diary that night, underlined twice. The wedding itself was beautiful, a small ceremony under the oak trees behind the church. I can still see the way the light caught Tanya's veil, how my son couldn't take his eyes off her. I stood there holding a bouquet of white lilies, feeling like every lonely night, every sacrifice, every worry had been worth it. When they danced their first dance, I cried, not from sadness but from gratitude. My boy had found his future. After they returned from their honeymoon, I visited their new home, a neat little townhouse with bright curtains and too many framed motivational quotes. Tanya walked me through every room like a tour guide. "We're doing a minimalist thing," she said proudly. I smiled, though part of me missed the cozy clutter of family life, photos, mismatched cushions, the scent of real cooking. Still, I tried to fit into their rhythm. I'd bring over homemade casseroles, tiny houseplants for the windowsills, little touches that said, "You're not alone." Tanya would smile politely, thank me, and then whisper to Michael when she thought I wasn't listening. "We don't really eat casseroles anymore," she'd say, "or that plant doesn't match the decor." I told myself she didn't mean harm. Young people simply see the world differently. When Tanya became pregnant with Lily, something in me bloomed all over again. I remember standing in the baby store, overwhelmed by tiny socks and pastel blankets, feeling a joy I hadn't felt since Michael was small. I spent nights knitting a white cardigan, soft, warm, made with the kind of love that hopes it will last through generations. The day Lily was born, I stood outside the hospital nursery, tears streaming down my face. She was perfect, a tiny bundle of promise. When Tanya handed her to me, I thought I saw something gentle flicker in her eyes, something almost tender. "She looks like you," I said. Tanya smiled faintly. "Let's hope she gets my drive, though." It was a harmless joke on the surface, but I remember how it lingered. As the years passed, small cracks began to appear, subtle, almost invisible at first. Tanya would sigh when I offered advice about feeding, saying things like, "That's how they did it in your day." Or she'd roll her eyes when Michael called to ask about one of my recipes. "Your mom's way is always the only way," she'd tease. I'd laugh it off, pretending not to notice the sting. Still, there were moments of warmth that made me forget. Lily's tiny hand reaching for mine during bedtime stories. Daniel's giggles when I'd sneak him a cookie. Sunday afternoons when Michael would mow my lawn while Tanya scrolled through her phone on the porch. Those were the days I'd tell myself, this is what family feels like, imperfect but together. I didn't realize that beneath those moments of sweetness, something else was growing, quiet resentment like roots spreading under concrete. Tanya began traveling more, working late, disappearing into her own world. When she was home, she seemed restless, as if our small family life couldn't contain her ambitions. Michael adored her still, blinded by love and loyalty. and I kept hopping time would soften her edges. I often thought of my garden when I thought of her. Some flowers, no matter how much sunlight you give them, never learn to grow toward the light. But I wasn't ready to see that truth yet. Back then, I still believed love was enough, that kindness could earn respect, and that patience could mend what pride had broken. If only I'd known that the real storm hadn't even begun, that every polite smile, every unspoken word was leading me to a day when silence would no longer be peace, it would be power. It started so gradually that I didn't even realize I was slipping into a new kind of servitude. At first, Tanya's trips were rare weekend conferences, short work retreats, the occasional out-of-town client meeting. She'd always call last minute, her voice syrupy sweet but brisk underneath. "Margaret, you don't mind keeping the kids for a couple of days, right? You love having them." And I did. I loved every moment with Lily and Daniel, their laughter, their messes, even their tantrums. They were the only reminders that love still lived inside that family. But weeks turned into months, and months into years, and soon Tanya's couple of days became entire weeks. Her suitcase by the front door stopped looking like luggage and started feeling like a symbol of absence, of expectation, of imbalance. Each time she dropped the kids off, she'd stay just long enough to complain about her flight or the weather. My son Michael would stand beside her, smiling apologetically, saying, "Mom, you're the best. We owe you one." "Owe me one?" I'd hear those words echo long after they left. It was a debt that was never paid, not with gratitude, not even with respect. I began to notice small details, how Tanya would arrive wearing designer suits and expensive perfume, her nails immaculate, while I stood there in my faded apron and garden shoes. She'd hand me a list of preferences for the children: organic snacks only, screen time limits, bedtime routines. Her tone made it sound like I was an untrained nanny, not the grandmother who had once rocked their father to sleep. Still, I said nothing. The children filled the house with color, and that was enough to drown the dull ache in my chest. Lily would sit on my lap and braid my thinning hair. Daniel loved to dig in the garden, always choosing the dirtiest spots. When they were around, I felt needed. Maybe Tanya was right in a way, they gave me purpose. But one afternoon, the illusion broke. Tanya came back early from a trip, unexpected. The children were painting in the kitchen, bright splashes of color everywhere, a chaos of joy. I'd been laughing with them, my hands covered in blue paint, when she walked in. Her expression froze at the sight. "What on earth happened here?" she snapped. "It's just paint," I said softly. "They were making cards for you." "For me?" She gave a short, humorless laugh. "You let them destroy my kids' clothes for me." I opened my mouth to explain, but she was already packing, gathering the brushes, wiping at the table. "I don't understand, Margaret. I trust you to keep them safe, but not to let them live like animals. You have all this time, you could at least keep things clean." Her voice rose, sharp and brittle. The children stared at the floor. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear her next words. "You should be grateful you have purpose. Most people your age don't." For a moment, I thought the air had left the room. Gratitude, purpose, as if I were some relic she'd found in a thrift store, useful but never precious. Michael stood in the doorway, silent as a shadow. He didn't defend me, he didn't even meet my eyes. That hurt more than her words ever could. I felt my hands tremble, not with rage, but with a stillness so heavy it frightened me. I picked up the children's drawings, wiped my palms clean, and said only, "You're right, Tanya, I do have purpose." She took it as submission, but it was the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. That night after they left, I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd humiliated me hours before, and took out an old notebook from the drawer. It had once been filled with recipes and grocery lists. I turned to a clean page and wrote in neat cursive. "Day 1, today," she said I should be grateful for having purpose. I smiled. She didn't see the insult land, but I did. It felt strange, writing it down, like taking inventory of my own invisible bruises. I wrote until my hand cramped, recalling every slight I had swallowed, the offhand remarks, the rolled eyes, the ignored thank yous. Each word steadied me. In the following weeks, Tanya's demands continued. "Can you keep them Friday night? Can you pick up Lily from school? Can you handle the doctor's appointment?" She never asked if I was tired, never wondered what I wanted. I said yes each time, but my diary grew thicker with truths she would never hear. I noticed patterns too, the way she'd post smiling photos from trips that were supposedly for work. Beaches, fancy restaurants, wine glasses raised against sunsets. I would sit on my sofa holding her kids while watching the world praise her for being a working mother balancing it all. They didn't see the woman who actually kept it balanced, the one they never mentioned. Sometimes Michael would call late at night, his voice heavy. "Mom, she's under a lot of pressure. Try to understand her." I'd nod, even though he couldn't see me. Understanding was what I'd done my whole life. Yet something inside me began to change, quietly, subtly. I no longer cried after her visits. I no longer explained her tone away. Instead, I wrote every evening by the window with a cup of tea gone cold. Each sentence was a small rebellion, a record of my worth. The last entry I wrote that month ended with one line: "The more she speaks, the less I believe her voice defines me." I didn't know it then, but that sentence marked the first step toward freedom. Because when a woman starts keeping track, she's already halfway to being heard. If only Tanya had known what I was writing, if only Michael had noticed the quiet steadiness in my eyes, they might have realized that patience, once exhausted, doesn't break, it transforms. And the woman they thought they could lean on forever was beginning to stand up for herself. It was a Monday when Tanya dropped the children off again, suitcase in one hand, phone in the other. She didn't even come inside this time, just opened the back door and waved from the car. "I'll be gone about a week," she called. "Business trip, don't worry, I'll bring something back for the kids." Her words were already fading as the car pulled out of the driveway. The sound of her tires grinding over gravel lingered longer than her goodbye. I stood there with Lily and Daniel, their backpacks dangling from their small shoulders, and I smiled even though my stomach felt heavy. I knew what business trip meant by now. Tanya never came home rested from those. She came home with a tan, expensive perfume and stories that didn't quite match her out-of-office emails. Still, the children needed me, and that was reason enough. I set up their beds in the guest room, tucked their favorite stuffed animals beside the pillows, and made spaghetti for dinner, extra sauce for Daniel, less salt for Lily. The first night went smoothly, even peaceful. I thought maybe this time would be easier. By Wednesday, everything changed. It started with Lily's cough, soft at first, then rough and wheezing. Daniel followed by morning, feverish and glassy-eyed. I stayed up the whole night, sponging their foreheads, whispering lullabies that I thought I'd forgotten. Their little bodies trembled as they slept, burning hot against my chest. I prayed quietly, asking Paul to watch over them. At 3 a.m., I texted Michael, "Both kids have fevers. Keeping an eye on them, might need the doctor tomorrow." He read it at 6:12 a.m. but didn't reply. Later he called and said, "Thanks, Mom. Tanya's tied up with clients overseas, but she'll call later." Overseas. That word made me pause. Business trips didn't usually cross oceans. By Thursday afternoon, while Daniel napped, I made the mistake of opening my tablet. I wasn't looking for trouble, just a recipe for chicken soup. But social media has a cruel way of showing you what you didn't ask to see. The first photo hit like a slap. Tanya on a white sand beach holding a cocktail shaped like a flower. Caption, "Finally me time, work can wait." The next was her laughing in front of a turquoise sea, wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than my month's pension. I scrolled further and there was Michael's comment below one of the pictures, "Looking great, babe, you deserve it." I sat back in my chair, the room spinning slightly. My tea had gone cold hours ago. The children coughed in their sleep. My eyes stung, but not from exhaustion, from humiliation. I had stayed up all night caring for their children, and she was somewhere under the sun bragging about freedom. I wanted to call Michael and tell him everything, but I didn't. Maybe because I knew how he'd respond. "She works hard, Mom, let her breathe." So instead, I turned off the tablet, boiled more water for tea, and went back to wiping Lily's forehead. By Friday morning, I'd had less than 3 hours of sleep. My back ached, my eyes burned, and I felt the years in my bones. Yet when Daniel's fever finally broke, I cried not out of relief but from pure exhaustion. There's a kind of tired that sits behind the ribs where love and ache blur together. That evening, as the kids finally dozed off, I opened my diary again. My handwriting trembled. "She is on a beach while her children sweat through their sleep. He likes her photo." I tell myself to stay silent, but silence feels heavier every day. I closed the book and stared out the window. The garden lights flickered on, one by one, illuminating the marigolds. Even they seemed tired of blooming for people who never looked. When Tanya finally returned, it was Sunday night. Her car horn beeped twice, her way of announcing herself. I stepped outside, careful not to wake the children. She looked radiant, sun-kissed, refreshed, dragging 2 suitcases that glimmered under the porch light. "Hi," she chirped. "How were my bobbies?" I told her they'd been sick but were resting now. Her smile faltered for a second, then returned, thinner this time. "Sick? Oh, well, kids catch things, you know how it is." She brushed past me into the house, her heels clicking against the floor. Within seconds, she was frowning. "Margaret, the living room's a mess. There are toys everywhere, and I thought I asked you to keep the sheets white. These look gray." I stood there, still holding her luggage. "Tanya, I've barely slept. They were both ill. I did the best I could." "Well," she said, adjusting her scarf, "if you'd kept up, maybe it wouldn't look like this. It's fine, though. I'll handle it." Handle it? Like I was a failing employee being replaced. And then Michael appeared. He must have arrived with her. He looked tired, guilty maybe, but he didn't speak. His eyes darted between us. I waited for him to say something, anything, to remind her that his mother wasn't the maid. But he didn't. He just rubbed the back of his neck and muttered, "Let's not argue, the kids are asleep." Tanya rolled her eyes, grabbed her phone, and walked toward the kitchen. I heard the refrigerator open, then the pop of a wine bottle. I set her suitcases down by the stairs and whispered, "Welcome home." That night I wrote in my diary again, slower this time. He was there, he saw, and still silence. The next morning they left early without saying goodbye. The house was quiet again, too quiet. The faint smell of her perfume still lingered in the hallway, mingling with the sour scent of fever medicine. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where every insult had landed, and looked at the clock. It ticked forward without mercy, as it always did. There are moments in life when pain stops feeling sharp and becomes something dull and constant, like a weight you learn to carry. That week taught me how heavy silence can be. And though Tanya's words still rang in my head, it was Michael's silence that truly broke something inside me. Something that, for the first time, I had no intention of fixing. It was an ordinary morning, gray sky, the hum of distant traffic, the kettle singing softly on the stove when my past decided to knock again. I almost didn't answer the phone. The number was unfamiliar, and I'd grown used to telemarketers and wrong numbers filling the silence that family once did. But something in me hesitated, a quiet instinct, before I picked up. "Mrs. Ellis?" The voice was male, warm but formal. "My name is Richard Harland. I'm calling from Harland & Co. Attorneys. I'm afraid this may come as a surprise." My stomach tightened. For a moment I thought something had happened to Michael or the children. My voice trembled. "Is everything all right?" "Oh yes, nothing tragic," he said quickly. "It's actually a good surprise depending on how you see it. I've been reviewing the estate files of your late husband, Paul Ellis. You may not remember, but there was a small plot of land in his name near Maple Ridge outside the city. It seems it was never fully transferred or sold after his passing. The title was amended in your name years ago, but no one followed up." For a moment, the words didn't make sense. Maple Ridge. I hadn't heard that name in decades. Paul had mentioned buying something there when Michael was a child, a bit of countryside for when we retire, he'd said. But after he died, I assumed it had been sold to cover hospital bills. "You're saying it's still mine?" I asked softly. "Yes, ma'am, legally yours. Taxes are minimal and it's in surprisingly good shape, an old cottage, some land. You could sell it or lease it or just keep it as is. I only called because we need to verify your address for the updated paperwork." He paused. "If you'd like, I can send someone to help you sort it out. It's quite a hidden gem." I thanked him, gave him my address, and hung up. Then I just sat there, hands still on the phone, the tea gone cold. The quiet around me felt different now, not empty but expectant, like the moment before rain. "A property, mine." The word echoed through my head. It felt almost unreal, like a whisper from the husband I'd lost, reaching through time to remind me I hadn't been forgotten. I spent the rest of the day walking through the house, my steps slow and deliberate. I looked at everything, the fading photographs, the couch Tanya had once criticized, the children's scattered crayons. For the first time, I saw it not as a home, but as a cage built from obligation. I didn't tell anyone about the call, not Michael, not Tanya, especially not Tanya. The secret felt too fragile, too sacred. It was mine, and I wanted to hold it close like a spark hidden from the wind. That evening, I took out my diary again. On a new page, I wrote, "Paul left me something. Maybe he knew I'd need a door out one day." The next morning, I took the bus into town and asked the lawyer to send me the documents. When he placed the folder in my hands, the paper smelled faintly of dust and ink, the scent of old promises. I ran my fingers over my name, typed neatly on the deed, Margaret Ellis. It looked strange seeing my name standing alone again, independent of anyone else. On my way home, I stopped by a cafe I hadn't visited in years. I sat by the window, sipping coffee slowly, watching strangers walk by. Nobody there knew who I was, not a mother, not a grandmother, not a woman measured by what she did for others, just me, and it was intoxicating. That night, I dreamed of Maple Ridge, of the rolling hills Paul used to describe, of wildflowers brushing against weathered fences. I remembered him saying, "When the noise gets too loud, Maggie, we'll go somewhere quiet and start again." Maybe he had known I'd need that place after all. For the next few weeks, the idea grew quietly inside me. Between Tanya's phone calls and Michael's half-hearted apologies, I'd think about that little house. I pictured the light slanting across old wooden floors, the creak of the porch steps, the sound of wind through the trees. It wasn't escape I craved, it was peace. Every time Tanya dropped the kids off with her usual impatience, every time she called me lucky for having nothing to do, I thought of the cottage waiting somewhere beyond her reach. My patience became armor, my silence turned purposeful. One evening, while folding laundry, I opened my diary again and wrote, "I have something they don't know about, a place untouched by their noise. I'll keep it safe until I'm ready." Then I slipped the deed into the back cover and hid the diary behind the flower jar, a secret in the heart of my kitchen. From that day on, whenever Tanya's voice rose, whenever Michael looked away instead of speaking up, I felt the quiet pulse of freedom humming in my chest. They thought I had nowhere to go. They thought I was trapped by love, by duty, by age. But the truth was simple and sweet. I had already found my way out, and they didn't even know it yet. It began like every other demand disguised as a favor. Tanya called one Tuesday afternoon, her voice as breezy as ever, words sharp beneath the sugar. "Margaret, I need you to stay with the kids next week. I'm leaving for a 7-day summit in Bali. It's work-related, so I really can't say no." She didn't wait for my answer, she never did. I looked out the kitchen window as she spoke, watching a bird land on the garden fence. The marigolds swayed gently in the afternoon wind, the same marigolds she once said smelled too old-fashioned. Funny how even flowers can outlast arrogance. "I'll drop them off Sunday night," she continued. "Oh, and it'd help if you could sleep over this time. We're renovating, so you'll have to use the guest room. It's small but clean enough." Something in her tone made me smile, not the kind of smile that reaches your eyes, but the quiet one you wear when you finally stop pretending. "I'll handle it," I said. "Oh, thank you," she said, relief spilling out. "You're such a lifesaver, Margaret. You really do nothing but help." Those words used to sting. This time they didn't. They just slid past me like wind against glass. After she hung up, I stood still for a long time. The kettle clicked off. The house hummed in soft silence. And somewhere inside that silence, I felt a shift, a deep, steady calm that wasn't anger but certainty. That night, I took out my diary and turned to the last page. I wrote slowly, "Tomorrow I choose peace." Then I began to pack. I didn't pack like a woman escaping. I packed like a woman preparing to return home. A few clothes, Paul's photograph, the deed to Maple Ridge, and my diary. I placed everything neatly in an old leather suitcase, the same one I carried when Michael was born. The handle was worn smooth, the clasp slightly bent, but it closed with a satisfying click. At dawn, I walked through every room of the house, touching the walls as though saying goodbye to someone I once knew. The air felt lighter than it had in years. The guilt, the exhaustion, the endless apologies, all of it seemed to dissolve as the sunlight reached the curtains. Before leaving, I placed a small envelope on the kitchen table. Inside was a single key and a note that read, "For when you realize what silence sounds like." Then I locked the front door, tucked the spare key into my purse, and walked away. The train ride to Maple Ridge felt surreal. The city melted behind me, replaced by open fields and soft hills. Every mile between me and them felt like a breath I hadn't taken in years. When I finally stepped off the train, the air smelled of pine and rain-soaked earth, clean, honest air. The cottage was just as the lawyer had described. Weathered white walls, ivy creeping across the porch, windows clouded with dust. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. While I swept, unpacked, and opened windows, my phone began to buzz. First a few calls, then dozens. By noon, it was vibrating constantly on the counter. I didn't answer. I knew exactly what they were discovering back home. I could picture it, Tanya pulling up to my house, dragging her suitcase, irritation etched on her face. The children in the backseat, restless, confused. She'd walk to the door, try the handle, then frown. Locked. She'd ring the bell, knock louder, maybe she'd peer through the window, her voice rising as she called my name, nothing. Then she'd call Michael, and he'd call again and again, each time with more panic. I brewed tea as the phone buzzed, the old kettle whistling softly. I sipped slowly, watching dust motes dance in the sunlight. When the voicemail notification finally blinked, I pressed play. His voice was strained. "Mom, where are you? Tanya's waiting outside your house. The kids are crying. Why would you leave like this? Please call me back." Another message followed, Tanya this time, her tone dripping with disbelief. "Margaret, this is really irresponsible. You knew I had to leave tonight. You can't just disappear like this." I smiled faintly and let the next call ring out before recording my own voicemail greeting, calm, polite, unmistakably deliberate. "Hello, you've reached Margaret Ellis. I'm away at the moment. You were right, I finally found something to do." I saved it, turned off the phone, and set it face down on the table. The sound of my own voice made me laugh quietly, not out of pettiness but release. Hours later, as dusk settled, I imagined the chaos unfolding back in the city. Tanya packing the porch, Michael torn between anger and confusion, the neighbors whispering, wondering what had happened to the quiet widow who never missed a babysitting shift. For once, the noise was theirs to manage, not mine. I stepped outside and watched the horizon bleed orange and violet. The crickets began their nightly song and the wind rustled through the trees like applause. Inside, I lit a single lamp and wrote in my diary, "They'll call it selfish. They'll say I abandoned them. But this isn't abandonment. This is remembering who I was before they forgot." I sat back and closed the book. For the first time in years, the house felt alive, not with voices or footsteps, but with peace. When I finally went to bed, I slept deeply, dreamlessly. No phones ringing, no knocks at the door, no guilt gnawing at the edge of sleep, just silence, rich, heavy, and mine. Somewhere, a part of me knew this moment would echo. That people would talk, that Tanya's voice would shake when she tried to explain it to her friends, that Michael would replay my voicemail until the meaning finally sank in. And maybe, just maybe, they'd finally understand. Love isn't servitude and silence isn't surrender. Sometimes silence is the only language respect understands. 3 days passed before Michael found me. I wasn't hiding, I had simply stopped being available. The world had learned how to reach me too easily, and it felt good to let the line go quiet for once. In those 3 days, I baked bread for the first time in months, aired out the curtains, and filled the cottage with the smell of lavender and soap. Each small act felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd misplaced years ago. When I finally heard his car outside, I knew it was him before I looked. A mother knows her child's footsteps even after decades. I wiped my hands on a towel and waited. The knock was soft at first, hesitant, like he wasn't sure he had the right to be there. "Mom," his voice was muffled through the door, uncertain. "It's me." I opened it slowly. He looked older than I remembered, tired, unshaven, guilt shadowing his face. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind moved between us, carrying the faint scent of pine and dust. "Can I come in?" he asked finally. I nodded and stepped aside. He looked around the cottage, eyes scanning the wooden shelves, the teapot on the stove, the flowers in the window. "You've been here all this time." "Yes," I said quietly, "it's peaceful here." He ran a hand through his hair. "You scared us, Mom. Tanya didn't know what to do, she." I raised my hand gently. "Don't defend her, Michael, not today." He exhaled, shoulders sagging. "I'm not trying to defend her, I didn't realize things had gotten that bad." "You didn't want to realize," I said softly. "That's different." He sat at the small kitchen table, staring at the wood grain as if searching for the right words. "She told me you left without warning, that it was cruel, but when I walked into your house and saw how spotless it was, the note, the locked door, I knew it wasn't cruelty. It was a decision." I poured tea for both of us and sat across from him. "It was," I said, "a long time coming." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I let her treat you like a convenience. I told myself you didn't mind because you loved the kids, but I see now that love doesn't mean never saying no." I watched him struggle with his words, the same way he had as a boy when he'd broken something precious and didn't know how to fix it. "Michael," I said gently, "you're a good man, you always have been, but you forgot something important. Your mother isn't endless. I have limits, just like everyone else." He looked up then, tears pooling. "I know, and I'm sorry. I should have protected you." I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. "You didn't have to protect me, you just had to see me." For a moment, silence filled the space between us, not the heavy kind, but the healing kind. Outside, the trees swayed and a single bird sang from the fence post. When he finally spoke again, his voice was steady. "She's been a mess since you left. The neighbors are talking. People ask why the kids are always with sitters now, why she's been missing work. She hates it, says you embarrassed her." I smiled faintly. I didn't embarrass her, I just stopped making her life easy. There's a difference. He gave a small, broken laugh, half admiration, half shame. "I think she finally understands how much you did for all of us." "Understanding is one thing," I said, standing to refill his cup. "Changing is another." He watched me quietly as I moved around the kitchen. "Are you coming back?" I paused, my back to him. "No, at least not right now. This place feels like breathing again. I need that. You and the children are welcome here anytime, but I'm not coming back to the life where my worth was measured by what I could give." He didn't argue, he just nodded, and for the first time in years I saw the boy I'd raised, the one who listened, the one who cared. Before he left, he hugged me tightly, longer than usual. "I'll tell her," he whispered. "Tell her whatever truth helps you sleep," I said. My silence already told her everything she needed to hear. After his car disappeared down the gravel road, I stood on the porch watching the sky darken. The quiet settled around me again, but this time it wasn't loneliness, it was peace. I thought about Tanya packing her clean house, trying to explain to friends why her mother-in-law had run away. I imagined the looks, the murmurs, the questions that made her flinch. I didn't feel spite, I felt justice, gentle and fair, like rain falling evenly on every rooftop. That night I wrote in my diary, "Sometimes silence is not the absence of words, it's the presence of dignity." I closed the book, set it by the lamp, and sat for a long time listening to the crickets outside. I realized that I didn't need an apology anymore. The truth had already settled into everyone's bones. Tanya would learn or she wouldn't. Michael would grow or he wouldn't. Life had a way of teaching the lessons love couldn't. And me, I had finally remembered the sound of my own peace, quiet, steady, unashamed. Autumn arrived gently that year. The mornings at Maple Ridge grew crisp and mist rolled across the fields like a slow-moving memory. I had fallen into a quiet rhythm, tending the garden, reading by the fire, writing in my diary each evening. Days passed without rush or interruption. It was the kind of peace that doesn't shout, it hums softly beneath your skin, reminding you that you're still alive, still whole. Michael came to visit often after that first talk. Sometimes he'd bring the children, sometimes just himself. He'd help me with groceries or mend a fence post while the kids ran barefoot through the yard. There was a calm between us now, not forced, not polite, just honest. One afternoon, as we were gathering vegetables from the garden, he said quietly, "Tanya wants to come here. She wants to see you." I looked up from the tomato vines. "Why?" He hesitated, then sighed, "Because she finally understands what she lost." I didn't answer right away. Forgiveness isn't something you plan, it arrives when you've carried the pain long enough to see it clearly. Still, I nodded. "Tell her to come tomorrow." The next day, I heard the crunch of gravel before I saw the car. When Tanya stepped out, I almost didn't recognize her. The woman who used to stride through life with her chin high and her voice sharp now moved slower, smaller. Her hair was unbrushed, her eyes tired. She looked human again, not untouchable, not superior, just flawed like the rest of us. "Margaret," she began, her voice cracking, "I wasn't sure you'd even let me in." "I wasn't sure either," I said simply. We stood in silence for a moment, the air heavy with words neither of us knew how to say. Then I gestured toward the bench by the garden. "Sit." She followed quietly, her eyes darted around the cottage, the flowers, the tools, the small signs of a life lived on one's own terms. "It's beautiful here," she whispered. "It's peaceful," I corrected. "There's a difference." She nodded, folding her hands in her lap. "I deserve everything that's happened," she said. "People talk about me now, they think I'm cold, ungrateful, and maybe I was. I was so busy trying to prove I could handle everything that I forgot who was actually holding it together. You never complained, you just disappeared." I studied her face, the lines of exhaustion, the rawness in her eyes. "I didn't disappear," I said softly. "I just stopped being where I wasn't seen." Her shoulders shook as she tried to hold back tears. "I'm sorry, Margaret, truly, not because people turned against me, but because I finally realized what I did to you. I thought your love was infinite, that I could take and you'd still give. I never thought about how lonely that must have felt. I wanted to stay distant, to keep the armor of dignity around me, but I saw something sincere in her that I hadn't seen before, humility, the kind that doesn't beg, only acknowledges." I reached for her hand. You were young, Tanya, and proud. I know what that combination can do to a person. But respect, I said, squeezing gently, respect is love's truest form. Without it, even kindness starts to rot. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Can we start over? I looked toward the fields, gold and quiet under the late afternoon sun. We can begin again, I said. But it won't be the same. I'll visit, I'll help with the children when I choose to. My life is here now, not waiting by the phone. She accepted that with a small, grateful nod. For the first time, her silence didn't feel dismissive, it felt like listening. Before she left, she turned to me one last time. You taught me more by walking away than you ever could by staying, she said. After her car disappeared down the road, I sat in the garden for a long time. The marigolds had begun to fade, their petals curling into themselves, yet they still held a kind of beauty, resilient, golden, alive. I opened my diary to the last page and wrote one simple line: respect is love's truest form. Closing it gently, I smiled, not the polite kind, not the practiced one, but a smile that came from deep within, where peace finally makes its home. The sun dipped low, setting the garden in amber light. I pressed my hands into the soil, feeling its cool weight, its quiet promise. Somewhere behind me, the kettle began to whistle, and for once I didn't rush to silence it. Let it sing, I thought. The world could use a little reminder that even the smallest sounds of peace are worth listening to. There's a certain stillness that comes after a storm, the kind that feels less like silence and more like understanding. That's what my life feels like now, not empty, not lonely, just understood. I spend most mornings in my garden again, watering the soil that once held only marigolds but now bursts with lavender, mint, and wild roses. The children visit sometimes, their laughter threading through the breeze. They don't remember the tension, they only remember that Grandma's house smells like sunlight and safety, and maybe that's enough. Sometimes Michael calls from the city just to talk, not to ask for favors, not to patch over guilt, but to talk about work, about life, about how Lily is learning to knit just like I used to. Those are the small miracles that come when you stop forcing life to move your way and start letting peace unfold on its own. When I look back now, I don't regret any of it, not the years of sacrifice, not the nights I cried in silence, not even the moment I walked away. Because every step, even the painful ones, led me here, to the version of myself that knows her worth without needing anyone to confirm it. I think about mothers often, the way we give, the way we hold, the way we quietly disappear into everyone else's story. We convince ourselves that love means endurance, that patience is our highest virtue. But the truth is, there comes a day when every mother remembers she's a person too, with her own needs, her own dreams, her own boundaries. That realization doesn't make us selfish, it makes us whole. If you've ever loved someone so much that you forgot yourself in the process, you'll understand what I mean. Love is supposed to lift you, not erase you. Tanya once told me I did nothing. Funny how, in doing nothing more for her, I finally did something for myself. Now when I sit under the fatting sun with a cup of tea warming my hands, I find myself wondering about others out there, mothers, fathers, grandparents, people who have been taken for granted but never stopped giving. Maybe you're one of them. Maybe you've stood at the same crossroads I did, torn between duty and dignity. So I want to ask you something. If you were in my place, would you have stayed or walked away? I don't ask for judgment, only reflection. Because sometimes the hardest, kindest thing you can do for others and for yourself is to walk away without slamming the door. If my story reminded you of someone you love or someone you once were, tell me in the comments. I'd like to know how you found your peace too. We mothers give everything, until the day we remember we were people first. And that reminder, my dear, is worth everything.